All right. Now, we've heard about these issues probably about every time they've come up with the autonomous driving, like with Tesla. Remember what happened on 10 last year, and then we've had 2 issues in South Florida with the autopilot feature on Tesla models. Question I have is the technology, at whatever point it gets to be great, it's going to be so much safer than us driving, if it's not already. The problem is, from a legal standpoint, from a liability standpoint, are we going to be able to make that transition to get to that place? Or will companies end up having to pay out so much we never quite achieve that level of autonomy behind the wheel, at least not for the foreseeable? Here to talk more about this, Quentin Brogdon. He's a civil rights attorney and weighing in. His website, by the way, crainlewis.com. Quentin, appreciate you checking in with us. What do you think about the liability for Tesla and some of these cases that have come up over their autopilot feature?
Good morning, Brian. Thanks for having me on. Tesla is kind of unique because they're out there in the forefront, and what they've done is they've hyped and they've marketed these vehicles as able to drive themselves, basically, and they're just not ready for prime time. They're essentially beta testing these on the roads. It's one thing to beta test your iPhone. If it crashes, you lose your information or you can't make a call or get a text. But if you're beta testing a vehicle that's driving itself over 100 miles an hour down the freeway and crashes into a concrete barrier and catches fire, that's a horse of a different color. And they market them as essentially self-driving, but in the fine print it says, keep your hands on the wheels, be ready to assume control. But when you call a feature autopilot, then you're basically letting people know that the car can drive itself, but it can't yet do that. One day, perhaps, but not yet.
Now, I hear what you're saying. I guess my question for you, Quentin, is do we have any statistics that show that these cars with these features being used are less safe than the average person behind the wheel?
Well, we know to a certainty some crashes are happening that would not otherwise be happening. Tesla has hyped the safety of the vehicles, and probably appropriately so, although it's not near what Tesla claims it is. The NTSB, in fact, has pushed back on that and said some of those safety statistics are because the autopilot's being used on freeways, and there are less crashes generally on freeways than otherwise. But be that as it may, we know, for instance, this crash that just happened where the lawsuit was filed, Walter Wang, a 38-year-old Apple engineer in California, a couple years ago the crash happened, but they just filed the lawsuit, family. The autopilot system took control of the vehicle and sped it up, actually accelerated it into a concrete barrier. Now, Tesla has blamed Wang since the beginning, talking about whether his hands should have been on the wheels, but the NTSB investigation showed that for 34 out of the last 60 seconds, his hands were on the wheel. So he wasn't just cruising down the road minutes at a time with no hands on the wheel. And so some people are going to die who would not otherwise die, but you're correct. In the long term, more lives probably are going to be saved. And the question is, what will be the public's appetite for these spectacular crashes and deaths that would not otherwise happen? How patient will we be, and how much tolerance will we have for people dying who would not otherwise be dying?
And will companies like Tesla
who would not otherwise...
Will companies like Tesla be sued into oblivion and not be able to get the technology to that next place? Do you think they're going to be able to make this transition?
Well, I think lawsuits have a function, and you're probably saying, well, of course you'd say that, Brogdon, you're a lawyer. But I think companies have to be incentivized to not take safety shortcuts, and there's always a profit motive to be the first at the front of the line. The Ford Pinto, that was a $12 part where Ford decided we'll save that money and we'll pay out in the lawsuits. We'll end up paying out less, and that's fine unless you're in the Pinto that burns you to death. But I think companies have to be incentivized, and if Tesla would simply stop hyping this as something it's not, if Tesla would not call it, for instance, autopilot, if Tesla would beta test these on tracks and test tracks instead of on highways involving live humans who are getting killed, that would be a horse of a different color. But it's the way Tesla's hyping and overhyping these, and these cars are most dangerous when they're partially autonomous, when the driver has to retake control. because the drivers today are getting lulled into a false sense of security, thinking they don't have to retake control. I'm using autopilot. The car can drive itself.
Yep. Okay, well, I appreciate it. Thanks for the discussion, a little bit of debate there as well. Quentin Brogdon, again, civil rights attorney, and you may visit the website for him, crainlewis.com.